Hello, everybody. And today I want to do a quick little proportions lesson on drawing the human face. It is kind of my forte. I have been told that I bring people's light back to those who have lost loved ones. And just wanted to give you a quick little run through on some of the basic proportions. Now, this isn't going to be precise for every face because every face is a little bit different, but one of the main things that I want you to remember if you want to draw anything is that you need to forget the names. So don't think the word nose if you are trying to draw a nose. Lose the language so that you can just see the shapes and angles and relation of parts to one another. As soon as you hear a word, your brain tries to give you a picture of what it's supposed to look like, and that might not be what you're trying to draw. So a quick run through. Typically in a face that's facing fully forward, this one's turned slightly. I couldn't find an example of one facing straight forward. This is a drawing that I completed 2017, it says, with both hands at the same time. So the proportions aren't going to be perfect compared to the picture I was drawing from, but it still meets most of the basic criteria. So one of the first things is you find that center of the face, and you can create a nice soft line through there if you want. I'm not one who likes to draw the lines. And then if you go halfway, typically, between the top of the head, so we can't quite see the top of this head, but the very top of the head and the chin, halfway is where the eyes typically lie. Most times, people will put the eyes way up here, and then they wonder why their faces look strange. So if you give yourself just a rough outline of the head shape, really light again, because mine always changes if I draw the outline first, but those eyes lie dead center across most faces. Then halfway between the eyes and the chin will be the nose line with most faces, and then halfway between the nose and the chin will be the mouth line. The other thing that I want to show you before I start drawing is that in the typical human face, you will have an eyeball space between the eyes. So when I'm actually measuring out, trying to get someone's picture perfectly, which I'll do a quick little sketch just to show you how I would lay something out, and then I'll draw with both hands so you guys get to enjoy that too. The eyeball I measure from thumbnail tip to pencil or pen tip in this case. And if you notice, in most faces, it's exactly an eyeball space between the eyes. So that can give you a little mark where you want to start the second eye. And then, see, I did this one pretty good for drawing it with both hands at the same time. And then, so there's an eyeball space between the eyes. There's also, if the face is facing us perfectly straight forward, there's also typically an eyeball space between the edge of the eye and the edge of the head. Just a little side note there. Once you get the eyes drawn, then you can use those as a measuring tool for the rest of the face. Now it's going to change if you're working with a 3/4 view picture like this. Obviously your center line is not down the center anymore, but if you draw those things in lightly first, give yourself those guidelines, it can help you to find where to place everything. So again, you see her eyes are here and top of her head's here. So halfway, we don't think of it that way, but if you take away the hairline, if she was bald, her eyes are exactly in the middle of the head. So we are going to do a quick little sketch. One of my favorite paintings I've done of this lady, but I want to use her as an example to do a sketch again today. I've drawn her several times with both hands. So, but you see her eyes are an eyeball space in between. Although they look farther apart, it still meets the criteria. So I'm going to set her up where I can see her. And if I'm working on any of my Words Matter portraits, I only work with one hand because it's much easier to capture a likeness, but using both hands at the same time, the proportions get a little off, and then I don't capture people perfectly like I can with just one hand at once. I'm going to just start her just so you guys can kind of see how I would work through. Typically, if I'm doing a sketch of someone, I'm going to do this in pencil, but for the sake of the video, so that you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm just jumping right in with ink. So that is her right eye. And if you're just starting, again, I suggest you do basic head shape. Give yourself some really light guidelines so that you know where everything lines up. For the sake of time, I'm jumping right in here. So we've already measured on here that her eyes are an eyeball width apart. So now that I've drawn one, I can use that as my measuring tool and mark, give myself a little dot. You can't see it, but I can, of where that other eyeball is going to be, and sketch that one in. So it's really a slow process if I'm being really precise and trying to capture somebody perfectly, which this one's not going to be perfect because I'm actually rushing faster than I normally would. But you get the idea. So now you can see we have the eyeball space between from corner to corner. And then the eyeball is the same size as the other one. This one is squintier, so it looks smaller. So now I can continue to use the eyeball as a measuring tool. So I know from her eyeball, if I had her eyebrows in here, which I can do really quickly for you guys, just so you can see where that brow line would be. I've gotten quite good at eyeballing where things need to be. So I don't use this all the time anymore. So I can see that her nose now is going to be from that eyebrow line, one eyeball. So it's actually two eyeballs, which is typical. Most noses, once you start measuring, you'll notice some similarities in many faces. So I'm going to go 1 and 2. Now this isn't exactly precise. There are other ways of drawing that you can get even more precision. You can do gridding. You can actually use an accurate measuring tool rather than your thumbnail and pencil. But I am showing you what I do and what works well for me. All right, and that is the only part of the nose that I will draw before I add shading, always. So, very basic, little sketch of how to start a human face. Again, if you're new to drawing, start with a nice light sketch of the head shape. Give yourself some guidelines across where those things are. Remember the eyeballs are halfway between the top of the head and the chin. The nose typically lies halfway between the eyes and the chin, and the mouth is typically between the nose and the chin. Basic proportions. So that's all I'm giving you for free on the lesson. Now I'm gonna just do some drawing for you. And if you would like more teaching from me, you can catch more lessons on my YouTube. I also offer private online lessons, so those things are an option if you would like more. A quick sketch completed for the night, and a little entertainment value of watching me work with both hands at the same time. It's not as fun seeing me draw with just one hand anymore now that people know I can do this. As I'm working here, okay, I pay attention to the angles, not only the space that I'm drawing, but the space in between, and watch that and make sure that I'm not leaving too much room in between lines. Watching how much space is between the bottom of her nose to the top of her lips as I'm drawing. Much more complicated when you're working with both hands. But if you'll notice, a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'll have one hand that's actually drawing and one that's doing shading, just because it's not always, especially if I'm trying to capture somebody's likeness, not always possible to have both of them making a mark that is going to make sense unless I'm working close together like this. And then I can get them to make those marks a little bit easier. I'll tell you a little bit about this woman that I'm drawing. My daughter and I went on a volunteer trip to Bali, and this woman was in our village, and we found out later that the village, everyone there called, she's since passed away, but they called her grandmother. And she was just the sweetest woman there. Seriously, she was always smiling. Almost always smiling. There were afternoons that we would see her wandering. I think she likely had a form of dementia or Alzheimer's, because in the afternoons later in the day she wouldn't recognize us anymore, but in the morning she always smiled. She'd give us a blessing as we were walking by. Unlike many of the other people that we met who wanted something from us, so she was definitely a breath of fresh air. But one of my most loved paintings is of her. If you start looking at the human face, you'll notice where things line up with one another. We're going to call that finished for tonight. I'm not sure how long I've been going. Not perfect proportions because, like I said, the two hands kind of stretch things, plus the angles I'm working. That's another thing. Ooh, I'll give one more tip before we go for the lesson. When drawing portraits, it's actually much better if you work with your paper vertical to you. So it's perpendicular to your tabletop so that you are looking straight at your drawing. What happens as soon as you put something down on a table, with faces especially, you elongate them. And I'm looking at the screen. I can only partially see my paper from where I'm sitting. You guys would laugh at my setup when I do these. But her face definitely is longer than what the actual person's face is. So that's just a last little tidbit for tonight's lesson. And I will talk to you all again soon. Love you all. Bye.